Hey everybody, welcome to eChannel News. We've got Chase Doelling. He's a principal strategist at JumpCloud. We've chatted with these folks quite a few times before, and they've got some new things happening. But first, welcome, Chase. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
All right. I heard you guys got this really cool trends report that you do every year, and you've got some interesting findings. So curious to find out what you found out. Let's dig into this. First of all, tell us why you do this report.
We do this because we try to get a very interesting voice and kind of cut of what's happening across the industry. And so when we do this report, we interviewed kind of over 660 different IT admins from both the US as well as the UK. But we also look at it from kind of the small, medium enterprise perspective. So organizations that have less than 2,500 employees. And that really gives us a better sense of kind of what's happening on the ground for a lot of bread and butter types of businesses. And it's a little bit of a different insight than you might get from Gartner's and Forrester's and kind of the enterprise of the world of really kind of how a lot of folks are running their IT organizations. And so that's really kind of why we look at this specific type of view. And then we're also gathering a lot of different types of information in terms of what types of trends, whether it's how you're leveraging MSPs, what your device mix looks like, and everything else in between.
These things I find very interesting because it's real-time information. It's a different perspective of information. And as you know, we just can't use, data points from the go-tos constantly. We need to, double check, triple check to make sure we're in the right direction because, data, depending on who you survey, can change the narrative, as we clearly know in this world we're living in. But so let's dig into this. But again, for everybody who don't know JumpCloud, can you give me the 1 mile high overview of what you guys do before we get into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not familiar with JumpCloud, we are a cloud-based directory that provide all your identity, access, and device management into one platform. So it really gives a holistic visibility and security policies for a lot of, I'd say IT admins, especially within that small to medium enterprise space.
Yeah, and for all you folks out there, you need this type of thing if you want to be in the cybersecurity business. Otherwise, good luck. Let's dig into this. So, what are some of the things you want to go through? What's the main thing that stood out to you when you saw it? I know shadow IT is killing everybody, but I'm sure you figured that out as well. What's happening there?
It is, and I think it's coming up a little bit more for different reasons because it used to be that you'd have shadow IT and it was just more of like really kind of an inconvenience. All right, what are we paying for? What are people getting access into? And we just don't know. Now, because the threat actors have become so much more sophisticated, especially within supply chain attacks, now it's like, hey, you really don't want shadow IT because it's different browser extensions, hey, it's different software packages that you're not aware of, and so you're opening up and kind of expanding your attack surface area without you even knowing. And so that's one of the areas that we dove into is kind of, what does it look like and has it continued to be and kind of why are people doing about it? And then also we also took a look at kind of different types of device mixes as well as just kind of, holistic things, right? Has your budget changed? How much you think about security? And then we also started to pull in a little bit more AI. So this is actually the second survey that we've done where we're kind of starting to track some of the AI trends, especially within IT. We're starting to see, I'd say the positively, fizzle a little bit, right? And people are kind of coming back into reality a little bit more in terms of what impacts it has within their organization. But we're finding a lot more people are still really bullish in terms of the impacts on their organization as well.
So before we get into some of the numbers as well, just to double click on shadow IT for a second, you know, admins are also culprits in this gig, right? They're actually, they're not preaching what they're doing, right? They're also in the shadow IT business, and it's sort of like there's this culture, right, where you need it because you need to do your job, and we do it as well because we need to do our job, and it takes so much energy to get these things, approved type stuff. And what's your take on the that perspective?
Yeah, on the admin side as well. And I think it does happen, right? And at the end of the day, we're all human and we want to do the best that we can do. And if someone has a shiny new toy and they say, hey, this will help you do your job faster. And so we specifically see this kind of within automation tooling and other things. And hey, we'll integrate into this, it speeds up my job, right? And that's really the end goal. And it's harder for folks because they say, kind of do a first blush of, hey, kind of what's the background of the organization, kind of how they're doing. And again, as I said, it's like there's other pieces within the supply chain that you just don't have visibility around. And it does take a while to vetting and kind of go through procurement and kind of all those different rigmaroles. And so if you could say, hey, if I can find a widget, I'll plug it in and I want to try with it and see if it, and then you kind of put it within this umbrella hat of like, well, I'm just testing it, right? And I'm going to
Yeah.
make sure we're going to go through that without, yeah, exactly. But we'll run in some production data just for funsies and see what that looks like. So there is a little bit of give and take, but my hope is, right, that the admins and security teams of the world have a little bit more hygiene and due diligence when they're doing that, but we're all human
Yeah.
at the end.
But at the end, that's why your tool exists, right? Because you allow them to discover these things, right? At the very least, you should know like what's lurking in your app box, and at the very least, you can say, oh, half of the apps here are not sanctioned, right? So that's like step one. So let's dig into some of the data points that you found. So what are some of the numbers that you've got there?
Well, I think specifically looking at shadow IT, I think we were looking at, hey, how concerned are you? And we found that, 84% of folks are concerned, right? Which is
Mm,
a decent number. If you think about,
yeah,
that's the vast majority.
reasonable.
Yeah, and 35% are very concerned, right? And then you can thinking about, okay, there's a real problem here. How do we start to address it and what does that look like? And we looked at and say, what are some of the types of issues where you can say, well, we actually just don't have the visibility in the tools and actually the business moves too fast. So again, coming back to our earlier comments of like, well, I just want to get things moving. And then there's other priorities, right? Because there's always other issues in terms of how you're thinking about locking down your organization. What are the types of policies that you can implement now within your team's velocity and making sure you can have that happen? But security is really top of mind. And this is another thing that we test kind of every survey that we've done over, kind of every 6 months when we've been running this since 2001 is, that security number continues to ratchet up in terms of how top of mind is it for you, a priority. And we're actually starting to see it translate more and more into not only top of mind, but also top of wallet in terms of how is this impacting budgets, right? And so we're continuing to see that budget has continued to increase and actually 50% of saying, hey, my budget increased over 10%. But a lot of that is going into security tooling, kind of understanding and getting that locked down from an organizational perspective. So we do see that conversation is happening more and more, kind of all the way from, the operations room all the way to the boardroom and making sure that that's a priority. But now it's kind of how does that fit within the rest of my priorities? How does that fit in with shadow IT? And how does that fit in with just kind of baseline stuff? Because we also found that, 20% of organizations still like don't have a password manager. So a lot of basic blocking is still, we're working on it, right? We're trying to get folks into the right space.
I think someone who could figure out the psych involved of why is 15% of the people don't care about shadow IT? I mean, do they even know what it is? I mean, do they think it's something weird? But I think it's they're just oblivious. They haven't really learned. They don't have the education about why this matters. It's almost like, let's just go on a boat and we don't need any life jackets, but the water looks kind of rough, but we're okay. We could swim. It's like this false sense of security, right? That
Mhm.
and the other the attitude I found was that this is not going to happen to me, right? This
Yeah.
happens to the other guys, right? The other companies, not me. I'm too small. I don't have this, and blah blah blah. And they don't understand that cyber criminals don't discriminate, man. Everybody's equal, right?
They don't. And I would say that, outside of the study we found here, but just some other pieces that we've done through research is say, even since the release of ChatGPT, the phishing attacks have increased by like 1,200% or just something crazy, right? Because so many more tools are available to folks and the ability to kind of having phishing programs, just as one example, is just increasing. And so even say, oh, it might not be me, it might not be me, but there are other people in the organization that might be clicking on other things. And so even though we're all the best stewards of security as we can be, but other folks within the organization just might not be up there, right? Which is why you still have security training awareness programs and other pieces, because it doesn't take too many chinks in the armor to kind of unfold that and kind of have the vulnerability exploit, unfortunately.
Just one click away, my friend. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? It's the human challenge, and hopefully education like this, right,
Mhm.
is what MSPs can share with their customers to sort of educate them, right, about what's the impact if you don't do something. There
Yeah.
are real consequences, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about compliance issues and regulations that forcing you to do these things. But let's talk a little bit about the IT sprawl thing that's happening. I mean, obviously, people have got devices, they're working from home, whatever they're doing, it's sort of like it's getting more. And then when you sprinkle an IoT into there, I mean, it's getting even more. Before it was like hey, we didn't have 5G, so IoT is sort of like nice but not real. But
Yeah,
now, hey, we got 5G and we're coming in with 6G later on. So whoa, at the same time, AI is hitting the airwaves. Let's
right.
make everything faster so we could put a trillion, IoT devices. How are all these IT device sprawl impacting the world again?
Yeah, exactly that. We're starting to see it stabilize into say, look, heterogeneous device mix is just here to stay, right? Because I think we've gotten to the point now where people are used to working on the devices of their choice and kind of have that. And now it's starting to hit more and more organizations. And so what we found is actually the Windows usage has kind of climbed up a little bit. So it went from 60 to 63%. Linux dropped down a little bit, and then Mac continues to increase. And one of the interesting things we always say is, hey, how many devices are you planning on adding or kind of removing from your fleet? And Mac continues to be the stickiest one. And so we only 8% of folks say, hey, we're actually going to decrease that. Whereas Windows has the highest variance and kind of Linux right in the middle. And so you're starting to see over time, right? And so that stickiness is starting to happen where it's starting to level it out a little bit more, right? And I'd say Mac and iOS devices and other pieces are definitely coming into the fold. But it's just it hits that work from anywhere type of lifestyle where, it doesn't matter where I want to be or kind of like, what rectangle device I have that I'm leveraging. I still want to access all my stuff. And so how do you do that securely and making sure that you have the right policies put in place so you can set up your people for success so you can say, hey, no matter where you are, you might be in a conference room somewhere, but you're able to do that securely and kind of have that trust. And so that's a lot of the balance that we're seeing amongst that, and just coming to grips with the reality that you got to do it across multiple devices and you have to look for kind of the tooling and platforms and making sure that you're able to do that successfully.
Chase, can you imagine the IT people like in a room, right? And then the executives and all these people saying, "Yeah, I want to use this device," and then the IT people going, "No, you can't use that device." I mean, you just can't say no anymore. I mean, if you are, quite honestly, I'm not quite sure how you get around that, because people have already gone through this process and they all have devices they like. Companies are smashing together, mergers and
Yep,
acquisitions are happening every day, and that's an Apple shop, that's a PC shop, that's whatever. And when the executives come in, they're going to use whatever they want to use, right? And it's up to the IT people to adapt. So rather than saying no, here's the world we live in.
yep.
They need to be flexible. So I think this one is sort of like they damned if they do, damned if they don't. But they have no choice moving forward for having a multi branded type device environment, right?
Absolutely. And this is a conversation that I just had yesterday. I was coming off an MSP conference and it's really common there where we say, hey, look, here's the preferred devices within our stack. Here's what we want you to go with. But lo and behold, to say, hey, we actually picked up a client and they have this type of device mix, or they have this many Macs that are unmanaged and we're not quite sure what to do about that. Or, hey, we picked up this client and they have a huge Linux infrastructure, right? In just terms of like, it's not really doing a whole lot, but we want to make sure that we at least have visibility into what's
Mm-hmm.
happening across those different pieces. And so you're starting to see it, especially across the channel, starting to morph and kind of say, okay, how can we be a little bit more adaptive in terms of our own security stack and management stack? So that way we can be ready, right? And so that actually we're able to take on more clients and making sure that we're well positioned ourselves within the MSP standpoint as well.
Right on. I mean, these are just critical points. I mean, honestly, I'm not quite sure how the community would actually grow without, addressing these things. It's sort of becoming like this is the new world we're living in. So get with the program type attitude. So you talked a little bit about relationships between the IT managed services that providers and the IT world. What's that looking like? Is it still combative? Is it collaborative? What does it look like these days?
It's a little bit of a mix, but overall we're seeing it's positive signs. And so what we found is we looked at kind of folks to say, hey, how often are you working with an MSP, both either solely or kind of in some capacity? And what we found is 75%, so three-quarters of the organizations we found is say are leveraging an MSP in some type of fashion, right? And it could just be help desk, or it could just be cloud infrastructure or security infrastructure, or kind of all those different pieces. But there really is a reliance on the community to rely on MSPs to help build up these businesses. And we also said, hey, how much are you planning to invest a little bit more? We actually found that 67% are actually planning to increase their investment with their MSPs, right? And so
Good
again,
news.
top of mind security and the budget that is trickling directly into, if you're leveraging an MSP, going into making sure that they are up to snuff. However, right, there's always kind of a silver lining there, is we found that actually 4 out of 10 who are leveraging MSPs actually still have a lot of security concerns, right? And say, we're in there, you're helping us, you're working us, but like, could you be a little bit better? Or, what's your own security look like? Those types of things. And so I think there's this knowledge happening across both sides where MSPs are seen as these trusted advisors. And so you're seeing this increased investment for the more successful ones that are leaning in on, their client relationships and making sure that those are healthy. But then there's also some skepticism, right? Especially for new folks that might be leveraging an MSPs to be like, well, how secure are we, right? Like we hired you for your expertise, but what does that look like? So there's a lot more back and forth, I'd say, and challenging because we know that we need to make that investment. And so now it's actually falling on the MSPs like, are you up to snuff, right? And that's really the conversation that a lot of folks are having.
I'm going to sprinkle in two more things in there, my friend. The number one, uh, uh, an end customer will change MSP A to MSP B at over 90% if MSP B, they believe, would deliver a better cybersecurity posture and practice than what they currently have. So if you're an MSP and you're thinking, this customer's been with me forever, think again, because cybersecurity is one of them things that is a balance. It tips the balance, right? Because nobody wants to be hacked, right? And another tidbit of information that I've been following and tracking recently that from Canalys, over 90% of the cybersecurity business is going to or through channel partners. So in the cybersecurity world, I mean, if you're not dealing with a channel, well, how are you going to deal with it directly, right? And I think you and I would agree there's so much cybersecurity noise, right? That is pretty difficult for end customers to figure this out on their own. And they need to have somebody that understands the game to sort of help navigate that journey. What's your thoughts on that?
Exactly. And I think it becomes harder and harder because there's so many more, I'd say, vendors and partners coming into the landscape, and there's so much more overlap, right? And if you think about
Yes.
email protection and DNS and kind of, managed EDR and XDR and like all the acronyms that are coming into this. And so if you are looking at this and say, oh, I can look at, I'll have all this. And people are relying on MSPs to basically do that due diligence, right? And say, hey, I need you to go out, look, who are the best vendors? And part of that too is what is the best combination, right? How much do we have? Not too much overlap, but we want to make sure that we're secure. And so we're really leaning on the channel to have that understanding, making sure we have the best tooling put in place, but also configured the right way. And that's really where it gets a lot of people caught up in terms of, hey, I can do that. But leaning
Wow.
on folks that do that day in, day out, right? That's really kind of where folks are putting their dollars and their expertise and their time and understanding and say, hey, can you protect us in a certain way? Sure, you can do it yourself, right? But I'd say the speed that the organization needs that the channel is able to accommodate with is just night and day difference.
Yeah. Plus, you can't hire the right people, even if you try to. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
Two, there's something called burnout, right? And three, some of these tools are very complicated and not easy to use. Yeah, it does it, but you also have to climb Mount Everest to be able to get this stuff done. And if you want to pull all these best of practice together, best of practice solutions together, you better understand how to orchestrate all of that. So seems like simplicity, better integrated,
Yep.
easier to manage as sort of the trend as we move forward. So you've got some from these IT folks you're challenged or you're surveyed, right? What are some of their biggest fears and their what do they want, and what are some of the biggest fears that you found coming out of this report? What
Well, they
keeps
want
them
less
awake at night?
meetings, right? Yeah, that's the biggest thing. And I think some of the fears that they have is really kind of, again, leaning onto security and then kind of have this breakdown of all the different security types, right? And so you find a lot of, hey, network attacks are still there, ransomware is still kind of top of mind. But if you look at all the different areas where we kind of ask a couple different questions in terms of access and overly abused privileges and kind of other pieces. And so if you combine the elements that you have that are tied back to people's identities and really what that access point gets it into, that's the bigger concern, right? So if you're able to lock down and understand who has access to what, who gave them access in the first place, and what are they doing with that, that is really the baseline that covers a lot more of security because there's always going to be, I would say, this general buffet of external threats that you're trying to deal with and new and different types of attacks and different vectors. There's some stat the other day where it's like someone took a proof of concept into an actual attack in 22 minutes, right? And you're like, that's just the speed that you're competing against. But there's just this natural baseline of just understanding what people are getting into, the types of tools that they have. Again, bringing back in shadow IT, like what is all the different type of tooling that people are actually leveraging in their day to day, and just having that visibility provides such a baseline. And that's really kind of what's keeping folks up at night, is just making sure, can I have an understanding of kind of the totality of my business? And then I can go from there, right? Then that helps prioritize, how I'm working with my partners, what type of security tooling I need next, where my budget goes. But it's that first start of just kind of understanding what people are doing that's really kind of
Mm.
getting people up at night for sure.
For sure. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. You can't protect what you don't know, type thing. And at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's not easy, right? This stuff, right? There's a lot of moving parts. Every day it's changing. It's a little bit nuts, It's for these IT folks and CISOs and so on.
Right.
It's not an easy job, right? And the reality, though, is that if you think that's not an easy job, wait until you are breached, and then see how your stress level scales exponentially.
Right.
And so, it is what we do to prevent, the biggest, problem from happening as a breach. What a, no conversation would be, complete these days without AI, but what's, how do you, how does the survey results reflect what's happening out there with AI? And maybe how you guys are maybe helping the channel with AI as well.
Yeah, it's always a hot topic. I'd say regardless of industry now, if you add in AI, it's like certainly we'll have a little bit more extra in terms of capital funding
Yeah.
and all the other pieces. But we're starting to see, I'd say, expectations dampered just a little bit. And so for the first time we asked about AI about 6 months ago, and then this will be the second installment. And so we're starting to see some trends here where I'd say the optimism is fading a little bit, but it's still pretty strong. I'd say most organizations, we had about 67% of organizations still plan to implement AI initiatives within the next year. So that's a decent amount of folks. And what we have found too is about the same number of folks actually have an AI policy, which I feel is like just a great first step. And a lot of
Wow.
organizations don't just be like, hey, don't just throw random stuff in a chat GPT. We really appreciate that. There's like some baseline areas that we're starting to see some positive signs in. And most people think that it's still going to have a positive impact to the organization, right? In terms of how we're going to drive revenue, kind of making sure our people are happy and productive. But there is a big concern that the AI adoption will outstrip the organization's capability to do it securely. Right. And so it's like we want to chase that. We know that it's going to be important to us, but how fast can we make sure that we're doing it in the right way, right? Which is why I bring up just having an AI policy in general is a great first step for a lot of organizations, especially within the channel, talking to your clients about it and say, hey, this is now part of this, right? And so instead of clicking on phishing links and kind of going through that, also think about how you're leveraging AI. What are the types of tooling that you want to involve within that? Because at the heart of AI is your organization's data, right? And so you need to get comfortable in saying, hey, how much do we want to expose in order to become more productive? And then what's that kind of limit for us? Where do we want to make sure that we are being productive and we have great marketing emails and imagery and kind of all those other pieces, but we're also not putting everything that we have and kind of our keys to the castle within all these different services. And so that's the balance that we're starting to see a little bit more with AI adoption.
Yeah, Chase, it's almost like a perfect storm, my friend. I mean, AI doesn't have a delete key, no comeback. You can't pull it back.
Exactly.
It's like, oops,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't want to do that. It's once it's out there, bye bye. And
Yeah.
if you put your family jewels out there, good luck, because that's what everybody's hoping for, right? Certainly in a bad actor game, right? It's complicated at the very least, but I think the findings are spot on with AI. People need to start, and maybe they have a little bit of experience now with cyber, in that they were a little bit late to the game,
Mhm.
and then they realize, wait a minute, if cyber, we're late to the game with cyber, now we're scrambling to kind of like, put up some walls to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
What about AI? Maybe we should start earlier and get ahead of this before it comes back to bite us. And I'm not quite sure what's worse, for in terms of like cyber breaches. Is it, cybersecurity posture and or AI, or when you smash these things together, 1 + 1 = 50? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's early days, and I think there's
Yeah,
a lot more folks that are playing with it, and we're certainly seeing it on the adversary side in terms of people are becoming more nuanced, right? It's so much easier to have a more personalized attack than it has been before. And at the same time, you're also hoping that, hey, we should know and understand attacks at large, right? And
mm,
saying, hey, we're able to recognize those patterns. And so it becomes a kind of a constant battle between signal versus noise. We're going to
yeah.
have so much more noise than ever before, but we're hoping that we'll have kind of some more stronger signals that we can at least help guide folks to. And so that's one of the pieces that I'm really optimistic and see, I'd say, on the positive team, right? In terms of making sure that we can have that is making sure that we have stronger signals so we're able to react quicker because we know that it's going to be happening on the other side. And again, those small chinks in the armor, like it's just going to be easier to get in than ever before. So making sure that we're ready for them.
Right on. So let's wrap this up, Case. What other things did you want that maybe we forgot to mention in your survey? What any more points you want to mention there? And then what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I think we covered quite a bit, right? And so maybe just perhaps a little bit of a recap in terms of, how the organizations are thinking about that. We're certainly seeing more and more approach to it, say like baseline security, making sure you have MFA enabled, making sure you have biometrics and that in SSO. And so we're starting to see more continued rise across all those types of trends as you have, I'd say, more uncertainty in the market, right? And so as elections come up both across the US and the UK, that was one interesting thing to say, hey, what are the types of impacts we might have there? And then as well as budget layoffs and other things. So we're starting to see a lot more organizations at that level starting to stabilize, which is a great trend that we're starting to see there. And so that's one of those pieces that we hope to can see that going on. And one other thing I would say is like kind of the bright spot that I had through a lot of this different data is especially coming back into cyber attacks is we actually found that over 73% of organizations said that they're financially ready for a cyber attack, which I think is actually pretty high. It might be a little
Wow.
bit more optimistic. But if you look at the trend and say, okay, that's great. At least people are thinking about that, right? And
Mm,
coming back to our conversation of your stress level will go really high when it comes back and you actually have an attack. But we're asking people to say, are you ready, right? It's no longer if, but a when. And people are having much more of a when mindset and putting together a war chest and understanding, okay, we're going to assume that this is going to happen. And so how are we going to be ready for that? And so that is the type of preparedness that I think has given me some optimism that we're seeing a lot in the results here.
totally. I mean, if that's the right number, then great. We're moving in the right direction for sure. And of course, they can have access to this full report, right?
Mhm.
Um, we'll put the link, of course, in it. But what's the best way for them to reach JumpCloud?
Yeah, absolutely. Just jumpcloud.com. We'll have it right up there. And we'll actually be hosting another dedicated webinar. We'll be diving into each one of these different results and other pieces coming through. But I explore people to kind of go through the report. We had also an amazing infographic that's great for MSPs to review with their clients, just to give them, hey, here's kind of a little bit more of an overview of what's happening in the industry. And then that's a great opportunity for MSPs to come in and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how you're different. Here's how you're better. Here's how, opportunities for us to improve. And so please leverage those assets in conversations with your clients.
Totally. And for MSPs, these are the things that you need to know because it's not just for you to learn as an MSP, but also what a great way to take this information and then give it to your customer so you can
Exactly.
educate them without all the hard work, right? I think Chase and his team did the hard work. So leverage it. It's available to you. And it's amazing if you bring information to your customers,
Mhm.
what it does for your business and moving forward. So it's a smart way of doing business. Chase, it's been a pleasure. Keep us posted how things are coming along and look forward to the next report. And we'll see how it goes. All right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.